The first scratch came after Maeve Calder had bolted the bakery door and blown out the front lamps. A thin, desperate sound beneath the thunder, like nails dragging over wet wood. She froze with one hand still on the broom, listening over the hiss of rain in the gutters and the last crackle of the stove. Briar Glen's main street was empty beyond the fogged windows, all the shop signs swinging in the October wind. But the scratch came again from the alley behind her kitchen. 3 times. Then a whimper. Maeve set the broom down without a sound, took the long bread knife from the cooling rack, and eased open the back door. Cold rain slapped her cheeks. Beneath the steps, where the brick foundation dipped into black mud, 2 small shapes huddled together, fur soaked flat, paws caked to the ankles, silver collars biting so deep into their necks that the skin beneath looked raw. The bigger pup shoved himself in front of the smaller one, lips trembling over tiny teeth. "Don't," he rasped, his voice too human for the wet little body shaking in the dirt. Maeve lowered the knife. "Oh, sweetheart." The pup flinched at the word like she had thrown it. In the mouth of the alley, lantern light swung. Maeve saw boots splash through the puddles, 2 men in plain wool coats moving past the bakery wall. But their belts were too polished, their steps too measured. Palace men pretending not to be palace men. One stopped near the rain barrel. "Soren said check the warm places," he muttered. "Pups run to heat." The smaller pup made a broken sound and shoved his face under his brother's wet shoulder. Maeve didn't think. She grabbed both of them by the scruff as gently as she could, tucked them against her flour-dusted apron, and backed into the kitchen just as the lantern glow slid across the bottom stair. She shut the door with her hip, dropped the bolt, and stood there breathing hard while muddy water dripped onto her clean floor. The bigger pup twisted in her arms. "No palace," he whispered. "Please, not the bad room." His collar flashed once, pale blue under the kitchen lamplight, and he bit down on a yelp so fiercely his jaw clicked. Maeve carried them to the stove, kicked a braided rug over the muddy prints, and pulled 2 flour sacks from the warming shelf. "Names?" she asked, wrapping the smaller one first. He stared at her with round gray eyes, rain trembling on his lashes, and said nothing. The older pup lifted his chin like a prince in a portrait, though his paws slid on the tiles. "Row," he said. "Just Row." "And him." Maeve nodded to the little one already sagging toward sleep. "Kit," the older pup said too fast. "Not Kit. Not quite." Maeve heard the lie and let it pass. Outside, the men's boots scraped near her back step. A fist struck the door. "Baker," a voice called, smooth as oil over a blade. "Open up." Maeve looked at the pups, at the collars, at the apple pies cooling on the table with cinnamon bubbling through their vents. Then she slid 2 slices onto chipped blue plates, pushed them in front of the trembling children as their fur softened into damp hair and small, dirty hands, and whispered, "Eat first. Answers after." The younger one reached for the fork, then stopped as the collar around his neck began to smoke. Maeve snatched the fork back before the boy's fingers closed around it, and the smoking stopped with a sharp little hiss, like rain hitting a hot pan. "Hands then," she said, keeping her voice low while the fist pounded again on the back door. She broke the pie crust with her fingers, blew on the steaming apples, and set a sugared piece on the edge of his plate. The little one looked to Row first, not at the food, at Row, like permission had been beaten into the space between them. Row's chin came up, proud and stiff, but when he lifted his own fork, his knuckles shook so badly the tines clicked against the plate. "We can pay," he said. His words were careful, too clean for a stray from the alleys. "We don't take charity." "Then pay by not bleeding on my floor," Maeve murmured, and that startled a breath from him that almost became a laugh. The man outside hit the door once more. Baker, you deaf? Maeve wiped her hands on her apron, grabbed the kettle from the stove, and yanked the door open just the width of her shoulder. Rain blew in, needling her face. The man in the wool coat leaned close enough for her to smell cloves on his breath. His eyes flicked past her, over the rug, the table, the warm yellow light. Hear anything back here? Thunder, Maeve said, and rude men scaring my yeast flat. His mouth twitched. Any pups come through? Behind her a chair leg scraped. Maeve shifted, blocking the gap. Only thing coming through tonight is water under that sill. You buying bread or wasting heat? The second man laughed under his breath, but the first kept staring at her throat, where the plain cord of her Omega registry tag rested beneath her collarbone. Unclaimed, unprotected, easy to accuse, easy to disappear. Maeve felt the old fear slide cold under her ribs, the kind she had carried since her mother died and left her a bakery with 2 cracked ovens, a debt ledger, and a warning never to let palace wolves notice her. The man's gaze dropped to her hands. Flour, cinnamon, no mud, thank the gods. Lock up tight, he said finally. Dangerous things loose tonight. Maeve shut the door in his face and held the bolt until their boots faded into the rain. When she turned, the little one had both hands wrapped around the pie as if someone might snatch it away. Apple filling shone on his chin. Ro sat straighter than any hungry child should, cutting tiny bites, chewing with his mouth closed, swallowing before he spoke. Palace manners. Nursery manners. Maeve's stomach tightened. Where did you learn to eat like that? Ro's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The younger boy, already drooping, mumbled, Rowan says Papa hates sticky sleeves. Ro went white. Kit. The name cracked out of him, sharp with warning. Maeve pretended to busy herself at the sink, but she heard it. Not Ro. Something longer. Something hidden. A few minutes later, Kit folded over on the bench, asleep with cinnamon at the corner of his mouth, and one small hand caught in his brother's sleeve. Ro reached into the torn lining of his wet coat and placed a heavy gold coin on the table. It landed with a rich, unmistakable sound. Maeve picked it up before she meant to. The metal was warm. Stamped into one side was a wolf with a crown between its teeth. The royal crest. Her fingers went numb. Where did you get this? Ro's gray eyes filled, but his jaw stayed set. It's mine. That's not an answer. It's all I have. Maeve looked from the coin to the smoking marks on their collars, then to the rain-blurred window where lantern light passed once, slow and searching. She crossed to the pantry, lifted the lid of her blue sugar tin, and buried the coin beneath the white granules where no customer, guard, or hungry child would find it. Far beyond Briar Glen, in the east wing of the Blackstone Palace, Darius Vale stood in a nursery that still smelled faintly of cedar soap and little boys' sleep, staring at 2 empty beds with claw marks carved into the posts. Lord Sorin waited by the cold fireplace, gloved hands folded. My king, he said softly. You know the Border Omegas have always hated your bloodline. Darius did not answer. He was looking at the windowsill, where someone had left one tiny muddy paw print pointing outward. Darius touched the muddy print with 2 fingers, then brought them to his nose. Rainwater. A thin thread of fear that belonged to Kit. Beneath it, something else had been smeared over the trail, bitter as crushed pennyroyal. His wolf lunged so hard behind his ribs that the nursery windows rattled. Seal the roads, he said. Sorin bowed at once, but his eyes stayed dry. By gray morning, Briar Glen woke to royal paper slapped against every post, pump, and shop window, the paste still wet and running in the rain. Maeve stepped out to sweep the front stoop and found one nailed crooked to her own doorframe. 2 princes missing. Rowan Vale, age 9. Kit Vale, age 6. Reward for safe return. Death for concealment. The charcoal drawing stared back at her through the mist. Rowan's solemn eyes, Kit's round cheeks. The same little cowlick Maeve had smoothed down while he slept behind her pantry door. Her broom slipped from her hand and clattered on the boards. Across the street, Mrs. Bell from the candle shop leaned out under her awning. Terrible business, isn't it? They say border trash took them. Maeve forced her fingers around the broom handle. People say plenty before breakfast. Inside, the boys were awake in the dim pantry, wrapped in borrowed shirts that hung to their knees, eating cold crusts without crumbs falling. Rowan saw the poster through the cracked door and went still as a nail. Kit pressed both hands over his collar. "No," he whispered. "No horns." Maeve crouched in front of them, the royal notice folded tight in her fist. "If you're who that paper says, your father is looking for you." Rowan's mouth trembled once before he bit it flat. "Papa isn't in the bad room." "Then I take you to him at dawn," Maeve said softer. "Not to guards. To him. Outside." A palace horn split the wet street, long and low. Kit screamed. Not a child's tantrum, not fear of being caught. A raw, cornered sound that ripped through the kitchen. His small hands clawed at the silver band as blue-white smoke curled from under it, carrying the stink of burned hair. Rowan grabbed him around the waist. "Don't shift. Kit, don't. Maeve snatched the bread knife from the table and slid the tip under the collar's edge. Heat bit through the metal into her fingers. She hissed but pushed harder. "Hold still, sweetheart." Kit thrashed, heels drumming against the floorboards. The knife slipped. A red line opened across Maeve's palm. Blood ran over her thumb and dropped onto the collar. The smoke stopped. The blue glow sank into the silver like a candle pinched out. Kit collapsed against her chest, sobbing into her apron. Rowan stared at Maeve's bleeding hand as if she had just unlocked a door no one was supposed to find. "What are you?" he breathed. Before Maeve could answer, boots gathered outside her front window, and a man's voice read her name from a list. Maeve's fingers closed around the bloody knife handle. Not to use it, just to have something solid in her grip. "Maeve Calder." The man outside called again, each syllable neat and patient. "Open for royal inspection." Rowan pulled Kit behind him, but Kit's knees buckled, and the little boy made that small animal sound again, the one that went straight under Maeve's ribs. She crossed to the pantry, shoved aside the flour barrel, and hooked 2 fingers into the iron ring hidden in the floorboards. The trapdoor groaned up, breathing out cold cellar air, wet earth, and apples stored in straw. "Down," she whispered. Rowan stared at the black square. "We won't leave you. You'll leave my kitchen looking empty." Kit clutched her apron with sticky fingers. "Pie lady, Maeve," she said, and pressed a clean rag around her bleeding palm before touching his cheek. "My name is Maeve, and I am not handing you to men who make collars burn." That got Rowan moving. He guided Kit down the ladder, jaw tight, one hand braced on each rung like he'd been taught never to scramble. Maeve lowered crates over the opening until only a seam showed between the boards, then swept flour across it with her foot and opened the front door. 3 men stood under the awning in plain coats dark with rain. Too plain. Their boots were palace leather, their gloves unscuffed, and the tallest one wore a gray scarf tucked high under his chin, as if cloth could hide the sharp cedar and clove scent rolling off him. His eyes dropped at once to her bandaged hand. "Accident." "Apples fight back." Maeve stepped aside before he could order it. "Wipe your feet or buy me a new floor." The tallest man smiled without showing teeth. "Careful mouth for an unclaimed omega." He walked in like the bakery belonged to him, dragging cold air through the warm cinnamon smell. The other 2 spread out, opening cupboards, lifting bread cloths, peering behind sacks of rye. Maeve kept moving because standing still would show too much. She wrapped twine around a pie box, checked the oven damper, poured yesterday's coffee into the wash bucket with a splash that covered the faint creak beneath the pantry floor. The tall man watched her from beside the cooling rack. "You live alone? Unless you count mice. No mate. No father. No brothers. You reading my registry or proposing?" One guard snorted. The tall one did not. He picked up Kit's small wool mitten from under the bench, pinched between two gloved fingers. Mud stained the thumb. Maeve felt the cellar go silent beneath her feet. Even the apples seemed to hold their breath. "This yours?" he asked. Maeve reached for the mitten and missed on purpose, letting her bandage flash red. "Winter bundles," she said, "for families near the mill. Children out there have fingers whether the crown remembers them or not." His gaze sharpened. "Generous. Hungry people come back when you feed them. That's called business." She took the mitten, tossed it into a basket of scrap cloth, and slid the boxed pie across the counter. "For the guardhouse, since royal inspection apparently pays in insults." The man leaned close over the box. For 1 second, his nostrils flared at the steam leaking through the crust vents, and something irritated flickered over his face, like the smell had stung him. Then he tucked the pie under his arm. "If you see the princes," he said softly, "remember concealment is treason." "If I see 2 scared children," Maeve said, "I'll remember who scared them." His smile vanished. He stepped back, signaled the others, and the bell over the door gave one thin jangle as they left. Maeve waited until the last boot splash faded before she tore the crates aside and lifted the trapdoor. Kit climbed up first and threw himself into her arms so hard her cut hand throbbed. Rowan came after, pale under the flour dust, eyes fixed on the window where the gray scarf had disappeared into the rain. "That man," he whispered, barely moving his lips. "He smelled like the bad room." From the street came a sudden crash of wood, and the pie box Maeve had given him burst open against her front step, apples spilling red gold into the mud. Maeve jerked Rowan and Kit away from the window just as the tall man's shadow moved past the glass, slow and thin through the rain. He didn't look back. He only ground one heel through the spilled apples, smearing cinnamon and butter into the mud, then disappeared toward the square with the ruined box swinging empty from his hand. "He wasted it," Kit whispered, offended in a small, broken way that made Maeve's throat tighten worse than any threat. Rowan was staring at the crushed filling on the step. "No," he said. "He was afraid of it." Maeve looked down at her bandaged palm, where the cut had started to ache in time with Kit's collar. Before she could ask what he meant, the town bell clanged 3 times, and Mrs. Bell's voice carried from across the street. "Market's still on. Harvest moon don't wait for weather." By late afternoon, the rain had thinned to a cold mist, and Briar Glen Square filled with lanterns. Wet wool, roasted corn, and wagons sunk to their hubs in mud. Maeve should have kept the boys hidden below the apples. She knew that, but the bakery's back door had a broken latch. The cellar smelled too much like fear, and Kit had started shaking whenever Boots passed overhead. So she tucked both boys under a canvas flour tarp in her handcart, stacked baskets of moon-shaped apple pies around them, and wheeled them through the alley behind the stalls. "No peeking," she murmured. "I'm not," Kit said, immediately peeking. Rowan's voice came low beneath the tarp. "You shouldn't risk this for us." Maeve pushed through a puddle, mud sucking at her boots. "Then stop being worth risking." That shut him up. For almost an hour it worked. Customers came with damp coins and cold fingers. Maeve sold hand pies wrapped in brown paper, smiled until her cheeks hurt, and kept the cart close enough to touch with her hip. Then the patrol horn sounded at the north road. Kit's gasp cut through the market noise. The tarp jerked.
A basket toppled.
Rowan hissed, "Kit, don't." But the little boy stumbled out into the alley behind the bakery, both hands clawing at the silver around his neck. Blue light crawled under his jaw. His bones shifted under his borrowed shirt with a sound like green twigs bending. Maeve dropped to her knees in the muck as Kit fell forward. No longer a boy, but a small gray wolf pup thrashing against the collar, cinching tighter and tighter. "Maeve!" Rowan cried, and for the first time he sounded 9 years old. She gathered Kit against her chest, though his paws kicked, though the hot silver burned through her sleeve. "I've got you," she breathed, rocking once, twice. The old song rose before she thought of it, the one her mother used to hum when fever took Maeve's sleep, soft and strange, with words that never sounded like words. "Hush now, moonchild, bone and breath." The alley went silent. Not quiet, silent. The horses in the square stopped stamping. A butcher's knife froze against its block. Every wolf in 3 streets turned its head toward her, eyes wide, throats exposed. Kit's collar dimmed beneath her hand. Rowan backed against the brick wall, staring at Maeve like she had become something impossible. "That's not a lullaby," he whispered. Miles away, in the Blackstone Palace, Darius Vale lurched from the council table so hard his chair shattered behind him. One hand pressed to his chest where the song had struck like a command. Lord Soren stopped speaking mid-sentence. Darius lifted his head, eyes gone wolf gold. "Briar Glen," he growled. Back in the alley, Maeve's song died on her tongue as Kit shifted trembling into a boy in her arms. And from the mouth of the alley came the slow clap of gloved hands. The clapping stopped the instant Rowan shoved himself in front of Maeve. One muddy hand gripping a broken broom handle he must have snatched from the cart. The tall man in the gray scarf stood beneath the alley arch with rain shining on his gloves. And behind him the market noise crept back in wrong, too thin, like everyone was pretending not to listen. "Beautiful," he said. "Your mother had a thinner voice, but the command was the same." Maeve's arms tightened around Kit. His skin was fever-hot under the damp borrowed shirt. "You knew my mother?" The man smiled, and this time he let her see his teeth. "Mara Calder knew enough to run, not enough to stay hidden." Rowan's face had gone gray. "Lord Soren." The name hit the bricks like a dropped pan. Maeve looked from the boy to the man, and pieces shifted in her mind. Cedar and cloves at her door, the wasted pie ground into mud, the way his eyes had sharpened at her bleeding palm, the way he had asked about unclaimed omegas like he was counting locks on a cage. Soren tipped his head toward Rowan. "Highness, still breathing. Inconvenient habit." Kit whimpered, and the silver collar pulsed once, answering Soren's voice. Maeve felt it through her sleeve. Not heat this time. Obedience. "You did this," she said. Her voice came out low enough that Rowan glanced up at her. "The collars. The bad room." Soren's gaze slid over her apron, her flower-streaked cheek, her cut hand wrapped in a rag gone pink. "I arranged a correction. Your king has ruled too long on sentiment. 2 missing heirs, a grieving alpha tearing apart his own borders, a council frightened enough to appoint a protector regent." He spread his gloved fingers as if presenting a tray. "Order from grief." It would have been elegant if a baker hadn't started singing Royal Blood Awake in an alley. Maeve heard her mother's voice in memory, not the song now but the warning. "If palace wolves ever notice you, may you drop everything and run." She had thought it was fear. Maybe it had been instruction. Soren stepped closer, and Rowan lifted the broom handle with both hands, trying not to shake. "Don't touch her. Oh, little prince." Soren's voice softened into something uglier than anger. "She is the reason your father will look mad by moonrise. The border Omega who hid his sons, fed them enchanted apples, dulled their senses with sugar and song. Maeve's stomach turned cold. No one will believe that. Soren laughed under his breath. Half the town bought your pies today. The guardhouse ate them all week. Your scent is everywhere, Maeve Calder. I should thank you. You spread the evidence for me. He leaned in, nostrils flaring, and for the first time irritation cracked his smooth face. Though I admit, those little charity boxes weakened my veil faster than expected. Apples, butter, Luna blood. A troublesome recipe. Far off, beyond the north road, a wolf's howl rolled through the mist, deep enough to rattle the lantern hooks. Soren's smile vanished. He looked toward the sound, then back at Maeve with sudden urgency. Home, Baker. If you want the children to survive the next hour, take them home and do exactly as I say. From the square behind him came the clink of chains being unloaded from a wagon. Chains clinked again, bright and cold against the wet stones, and the sound made Kit fold both hands over his ears. Soren did not grab them in the alley. He did worse. He walked behind Maeve's cart all the way back to the bakery with 2 guards flanking the boys and half the market trailing at a distance, whispering under umbrellas and lanterns. By the time Maeve reached her front step, the rain had changed to hard little pellets of snow that ticked against the pie tins. Mrs. Bell stood outside the candle shop with one hand at her mouth. The miller would not meet Maeve's eyes. On Maeve's stoop, Soren lifted a folded paper sealed with red wax and read in a carrying voice. Confession of Maeve Calder, unclaimed Omega, admitting the concealment and enchantment of Princes Rowan and Kit Vale by means of spelled apples, blood-bound pastry, and seditious Luna song. Maeve stared at the paper. Her name curled across the bottom in ink that looked almost like hers, except the M was wrong. Her mother had taught her to make the first stroke like a hook. This one was a blade. That's forged, Maeve said. Her breath smoked white. You couldn't even copy my hand right. Soren's eyes flicked once to the signature, and that tiny irritation returned. Chain her. Rowan lunged before Maeve could stop him. The silver at his throat flashed hot, and he hit the doorframe with a cry, one hand clawing at the band as his shoulders jerked toward a shift that would not come. Kit screamed his brother's name and tried to run to him, but his own collar flared, blue-white light crawling under his jaw like frost. Maeve stepped between the guards and the boys. Don't touch them. A chain snapped around her wrists. Cold iron bit through flour and rainwater. The watching crowd went silent except for the soft slap of sleet in the gutter. Soren leaned close enough that only she could hear him. Run, he murmured. Make it convincing. The woods are open. A guilty Omega fleeing with royal blood on her hands. Darius will arrive to ashes and a story he can believe. Maeve looked past him. The alley gate hung open. Beyond it, the tree line waited, black and wet and possible. For 1 second, she saw herself vanishing into it the way her mother must have once vanished. Lungs burning, feet bleeding. Alive because she had left something behind. Then Kit made a small choking sound from the doorway. Rowan had one arm around him, both boys shaking so hard their knees knocked, their collars glowing brighter every time Soren breathed. Maeve lifted her chained hands, shoved them hard against the nearest guard's pie-slick breastplate, and used his stumble to step backward over her own threshold. Inside, she snapped. Rowan blinked at her. Maeve, table. Now. Her voice cracked through the room like the old lullaby without music. The boys moved. Maeve slammed the door, dropped the oak bar into place, and dragged a flour sack against the gap while fists hit the other side. Soren laughed from the street. You've locked yourself in your own cage. Maeve's hands shook as she struck a match and lit the stove. 3 unbaked pies waited on the counter, apples already sugared, crusts pinched closed with her thumbprints. She slid them into the oven with chains hanging from her wrists and turned to the princes at her table. "No child of mine faces terror hungry," she said, and outside, above Soren's next order, a single heavy step landed in the snow. The step came again, not hurried, not cautious, a weight that pressed the whole street quiet. Even the fists against Maeve's door stopped. Through the flour-dusted front window, she saw only a broad shape moving through the slanting snow, black coat snapping at his knees, hair dark with meltwater, no guards behind him, no banner, no horn. The chains on her wrists went still. Rowan rose from the bench so fast his chair scraped. "Papa," he breathed, and the word cracked in half. Kit tried to answer, but the collar at his throat flared blue, squeezing his voice into a whimper. Outside, Soren called, "Too smooth, too loud. My king, stand back. The Omega has barricaded herself with the heirs. She is unstable." The man in the snow did not look at him. He lifted his head toward Maeve's glowing kitchen window and drew one breath. Maeve felt that breath somehow, felt it pull through the cracks around the door, through cinnamon steam and wood smoke and the sharp fear sweat of two little boys. The oven timer gave its tiny bell. Absurd. Ordinary. Maeve snatched a towel, opened the oven, and heat rushed over her face as she dragged out the 3 apple pies, crusts blistered gold, filling bubbling through the moon-shaped cuts. Behind her, Rowan had both arms around Kit, his eyes fixed on the door like if he blinked, his father might vanish. The oak bar shuddered once. Then the door burst inward with a crack of split wood, snow spinning across Maeve's clean floor. The Alpha King filled the doorway. Darius Vale was taller than the stories, shoulders wet with snow, eyes burning wolf gold in a face carved down to grief and fury. His gaze swept the room and stopped. There they were, the 2 lost wolf pup princes at Maeve Calder's table, hair dusted with flour, cheeks sticky with apple filling, Kit's small fingers still wrapped around a fork, Rowan standing crooked in a borrowed shirt with one sleeve too short. Alive, federal terrified. Maeve picked up the nearest thing her chained hands could manage. Her old maple rolling pin, smooth from years of work, heavy as a promise. She stepped in front of the boys before Darius took another breath. Her cut palm throbbed against the wood. "If you came to hurt them," she said, voice shaking but clear, "you'll go through me first." Darius stared at her. Snow melted from his lashes. The room tightened around the silence. Then Kit sobbed, "Papa, don't let Lord Soren put us back in the bad room." The king's face changed, not softened, broke. His eyes dropped to the silver collar smoking against Kit's throat, then to Rowan's, then to Maeve's blood-stained bandage and the iron chain locked around her wrists. Behind him, Soren stepped onto the threshold with 2 guards and lifted one gloved hand. "You see? She has bewitched them. Listen to their confusion." At the sound of his voice, both collars ignited, blue fire crawling under the boy's skin. Rowan screamed through clenched teeth. Darius turned so fast the air snapped, but Maeve moved first. She slammed the rolling pin down across Kit's collar with both chained hands. Not hard enough to hurt him, hard enough to jar the spell, and sang one ragged line of her mother's lullaby. Every wolf outside dropped to one knee in the snow. Darius staggered, one hand braced on the broken doorframe, staring at Maeve as if her voice had reached inside his ribs and closed around his heart. Soren's face went white. "Impossible," he whispered. Maeve looked past Darius, past the kneeling guards, to the advisor backing away into the sleet. "Run out of lies?" she said. Soren's glove slipped beneath his coat, and Rowan suddenly shouted, "Maeve, the red vial! Maeve, the red vial!" Rowan's warning cut through the kitchen as Soren yanked a glass tube from his coat and snapped the wax seal with his thumb. A bitter smell burst out, pennyroyal, ash, and the same sour rot Darius had found on the nursery windowsill. The king moved like a storm breaking. One moment Sorin had the vial lifted toward the boys, and the next Darius had his wrist pinned against the doorframe, glass crunching under his boot, red liquid hissing into the snow. "That scent?" Darius said, his voice so low the pie tins trembled on the counter. "You put it in their room." Sorin's smooth mask cracked. "My king, she—" "Say one more word about her," Darius growled, "and I will forget there is a council." Maeve's chained wrists sagged around the rolling pin. Kit was crying into Rowan's sleeve, the blue fire in both collars flickering weaker now, confused by Maeve's song and their father's fury. Darius dropped to one knee in front of his sons, big hands hovering like he was afraid even love might hurt them. "Rowan, Kit, look at me." Rowan's chin wobbled. "We tried to come home, Papa. The collars made us afraid of horns, of guards, of you." Kit pressed a sticky apple hand to Darius's cheek. "Pie Lady didn't take us. She hid us warm." Darius shut his eyes for one hard second. When he opened them, they were wet. "I know, cub." Maeve reached for Kit's collar with her bandaged hand. Darius caught her chain instead, and his face went dark at the iron biting her skin. With one twist, he snapped the links apart. Then he looked at her. Not over her, not through her registry tag, but at her, as if the whole room had narrowed to flour on her cheek and blood on her palm. The air changed. Maeve felt it in her bones, a golden pull under her ribs, answering something in him that had been howling for years. Darius breathed in, and his wolf gold eyes softened. "You," he whispered. Maeve swallowed. "Me what?" "My mate," he said, like the words hurt and healed at once. "My Luna." Sorin made a strangled sound. "She is an unclaimed border Omega." "No," Darius said, standing with Maeve's broken chain in his fist. "She is the woman your spells couldn't silence." By dawn, the sugar tin sat open on the council table. White crystals spilled around the heavy royal coin Rowan had used to pay for pie. The burned collars lay beside it, split by Darius's claws and stained where Maeve's blood had dimmed their magic. Rowan spoke in a clear little voice about the bad room. Kit named the clove smell. The guardhouse pies, every box folded in Maeve's twine, had carried her Luna sent through Briar Glen until Sorin's veil unraveled trail by trail. No one looked at Maeve's registry tag after that. Sorin's gray scarf was stripped from his throat, his rank taken, his wrists locked in the same cold iron he had brought for her. When the chamber doors closed behind him, Kit whispered, "No more bad room?" Darius lifted both boys into his arms. "Never again." Snow still dusted Briar Glen when they returned to the bakery. The broken door had been mended by palace carpenters, but Maeve's old stove still coughed before it caught, and cinnamon still lived in the floorboards. Darius stood awkwardly by the table, a king too large for her kitchen, holding his crown under one arm like it had become the least important thing he owned. "Come to the palace," he said quietly. "Not as a servant, not because I command it. Come because they love you, because I—" His throat worked. "Because my wolf knew your voice before I knew your name." Maeve looked at Rowan trying to pretend he wasn't listening, at Kit with pie filling already on his chin, at the man who had come through snow ready for war and stayed on his knees for his children. She set 4 plates on the table. "I'll come," she said, "if my bakery comes with me." Darius smiled for the first time, tired and real. "Then the palace will smell like apples." That night, after the boys fell asleep under her kitchen table wrapped in clean quilts, a soft scratch sounded at the back door. Maeve opened it to find no frightened pups in the rain this time, only Darius on the step, snow in his hair, holding a sack of apples and asking very carefully if there was